In a quiet English village, long ago, where country lanes curved between fields of wildflowers and the chiming of distant bells drifted through the morning mist, there lived a woman whose voice was barely heard in her own time. And yet, that voice, calm, sharp, and full of quiet truth, would echo gently across centuries. Her words were whispered through stories of love, patience, and the smallest moments that shape a life. She sat by windows lit with soft candlelight, watching the way a teacup was set down, the slight turn of a head, the unspoken hopes carried in a glance. Her pen moved slowly, not to rush toward greatness, but to observe, to capture. Her name was Jane Austen. Tonight, we'll walk softly through her world. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, the podcast designed to lull you into a peaceful slumber with soothing stories through time, places, and ideas. Whether you're winding down after a long day or simply looking for a peaceful escape, you're in the right place. My name's Jack, and I'm so happy to have you here with me. Each night on Sleepy Journeys, we set off together on gentle adventures designed to soothe your mind and ease you into rest. You'll find journeys through history, comforting fairy tales, myths and folklore, the wonders of science, fascinating inventions, inspiring famous figures, music history, and even calm explorations around the world. No matter where your curiosity takes you, there's a dreamy, Sleepy Journeys show for you. Tonight, we're going to embark on a gentle journey through Jane Austen, A Quiet Legacy. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, take a deep breath and let's begin. Beneath the hush of twilight, where hedgerows frame winding English lanes and candlelight glimmers through cottage windows, we begin our quiet reflection. A cool, gentle breeze drifts through the countryside, stirring the leaves of a rosebush near a garden wall. Inside a modest sitting room, a single figure sits by the window, pen poised over a sheet of ivory paper, while a small fire crackles in the hearth. There is no rush, no crowd, only stillness and the steady, graceful rhythm of thought becoming words. This was the world of Jane Austen. A life crafted through subtle observation, soft humor, and the quiet elegance of well-chosen words. Her stories are intimate, composed like chamber music, echoing with the laughter of sisters, the rustle of muslin gowns, and the turning of pages in drawing rooms lit by oil lamps. Born into the Hampshire countryside in 1775, Jane's life flowed gently alongside the slower rhythms of rural England. She lived among family, books, and conversation. Her eye was always attentive to the quiet interplay between people, a glance, a pause, a kind word withheld or offered. Tonight, as you sink deeper into your pillow, we will wander beside her. Through orchard paths and garden gates, through the candlelit silence of her writing desk, through seasons of change and stillness, and into the gentle legacy she left behind. Her novels, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Sense and Sensibility, Persuasion, were penned with careful grace. They speak to us even now with a familiar whisper, as if we were sitting beside her in the drawing room, sharing quiet confidences over tea. You need not know every detail of her biography to rest in the serenity of her world. The names and dates can fade like footprints in a soft rain. What remains is the feeling, that soft, clear awareness of a mind observing gently and a heart that saw the world in stillness and warmth. So, as the night deepens around us, we open the door to that peaceful world. We'll take it slowly, as Jane would have liked. We'll walk beside her, through the calm corners of her life, where words blossomed in silence and character bloomed like wildflowers in the fields of Hampshire. And so, let us begin the journey with the quietest of steps. Nestled among the gently undulating fields of Hampshire, where the land rises in soft green waves and the wind hums quietly through hedgerows, lies the village of Steventon, a place of tranquility and timeless rhythm. This was the world Jane Austen was born into on a cold December day in 1775, a world shaped by the hush of early mornings and the warm embrace of candlelit evenings, where the cycle of seasons marked the passage of time more than any clock. Steventon was not grand. It was not fashionable or fast. But it was rich in stillness, in closeness, in texture. In the rustle of leaves along country lanes, in the sound of laughter coming from behind stone walls, and in the quiet companionship of family and nature. Here, in a modest rectory surrounded by trees and fields, Jane's imagination began to grow. Her childhood, like the rhythm of the Hampshire countryside itself, unfolded at a gentle pace, marked more by intimate conversation than dramatic change. And it was within this stillness, this absence of spectacle, that something profound began to take shape, a sensibility, a way of seeing, and a voice that would one day speak softly to generations. The Austen family home stood just off a lane lined with ash and elm, its windows framed by ivy and wild roses that climbed up the brick in quiet determination. The rectory itself was modest, 2 stories, with narrow staircases, small paned windows, and a thatched roof that echoed with the drumming of soft rain in springtime. Inside, the rooms were filled with signs of a life both busy and calm. The scent of bread often rose from the kitchen, mingling with the sharper tang of ink and parchment from Reverend Austen's study. Jane was the 7th of 8 children, and the household was always humming with energy. Her brothers came and went with school and studies, while her sister Cassandra remained her closest friend. The girls often shared a room, their whispered thoughts carried across the dark before sleep. Their parents fostered curiosity as well as obedience. Reverend Austen maintained a library of nearly 500 volumes, a vast collection for the time, and Jane was allowed to read freely from it. Novels, sermons, poems, histories, periodicals, each one absorbed slowly, turned over in thought, and layered into her inner world. Life in the Austen home followed no rigid schedule, but flowed with natural structure. Mornings often began early, with the creaking of the old stairs as feet descended in search of tea. Letters arrived by horse post and were read aloud. In the evenings, the drawing room would fill with voices again as the fire crackled. The family would read together, sometimes sharing stories they had written for one another's amusement, tales of exaggerated aristocrats, absurd plots, and unlikely adventures. Jane's contributions, even at a young age, were marked by an unusual clarity and a quiet, confident wit. But it was more than creativity that grew in that household. It was a practice of noticing, of paying attention to people's habits, to their contradictions, to the delicate emotional weather that passed silently across a person's face during conversation. Jane learned to listen, not just to words, but to what lay beneath them. In that small house, with its narrow halls and crooked beams, a new kind of writer was quietly being formed, not one who would chase the spotlight, but one who would reveal the extraordinary within the ordinary, one page at a time. Beyond the walls of the rectory, the world opened gently. There were meadows that rolled outward like quilts stitched in shades of green and gold, and footpaths that curved between stone fences and flowering hedgerows. Jane and Cassandra walked these paths daily, moving side by side in unhurried rhythm, their conversation flowing easily or falling into thoughtful silence. The rustle of leaves, the call of skylarks, the distant bark of a farm dog, all filled the space around them like the accompaniment to a soft-spoken story. Jane carried a small notebook tucked into her hand or hidden beneath her shawl, and while her pen often remained still on these walks, her mind did not. Characters formed in fragments, not as full figures at first, but in expressions she'd glimpsed, phrases she'd heard, the memory of a look exchanged at a parish gathering. She was already collecting the seeds that would bloom later in her writing. The countryside, too, became part of her inner landscape. She noticed the light as it changed through the day, how the long shadows of evening settled like lace across the grass, how morning fog made every leaf seem brushed with silence. Her surroundings taught her how to evoke setting not with spectacle, but with intimacy. In her future novels, even the simplest of environments, a lane, a garden, a village fair, would carry a quiet richness because she had known them deeply. Though she would one day leave Steventon, it never truly left her. The memory of its sloping hills, its quiet evenings, its weathered wood and winding roads, all of these found their way into her fiction as emotional texture. The love of home, of grounded place, of steady ritual, these became her foundation. And through it all, Jane remained steady in her observation. She wrote early stories in secret and shared them only with family. They were humorous, sometimes wild, always clever. She practiced the balance of detail and pacing and learned the rhythm of how a sentence could unfold, just like a path through a field, inviting, deliberate, never rushed. Hampshire was her beginning, not just in life, but in voice. In the country life she led, she learned to watch, to wait, and to craft meaning from the spaces in between things, between people, between words, between footsteps on a well-worn path. It was a quiet place, but for Jane, it held everything. In the evenings, after the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the hills of Hampshire, the drawing room in the Austen household would slowly begin to glow with flickering candlelight. The scent of beeswax and warm hearth coalesced in the stillness, and the muffled creak of furniture settling echoed gently through the timber beams above. It was in this room, modest, lively, never fully private, that Jane Austen began to give shape to the world within her imagination. There was a small 12-sided walnut table placed discreetly near a window. Upon it, a stack of writing paper, a bottle of ink, a penknife used to sharpen her quills, and often a small sheet of blotting paper to conceal her work should footsteps approach unexpectedly. This was not a writer's haven in the traditional sense. No silence, no isolation. It was a shared space, the hearth of family life. Yet Jane wrote. She wrote amid conversation, amid laughter, amid the rhythm of domestic life. She wrote as the stories within her pressed forward, gently, persistently, until they were placed on the page. Each day held its own slow rituals. Jane often rose early, though not before the household stirred. The drawing room, still cool with the remnants of night, became her morning sanctuary. She would sit quietly, dressed in simple linen, her writing tools laid out neatly before her. As others began to move through the house, her pen would already be dancing lightly across the page, each word a step, each sentence a silent dance. The Austen household was lively, full of noise and warmth. Conversations rose and fell, dishes clinked in the kitchen, visitors arrived and departed. But Jane's writing persisted, flowing quietly around the edges of the day. She wrote when there was time, in brief stretches, between tasks, in the slivers of stillness afforded by routine. There was no pretension in her writing environment, no lavish materials. Paper was expensive and often reused. She was frugal in her drafts, scribbling ideas in margins and reworking lines with delicate care. Her early works, composed during these years of drawing room writing, reveal a mind both playful and sharp, one that watched the world with amused precision. The works she shared with her family were bold, satirical, even absurd. But underneath the fun, something enduring was taking form. Jane was learning control, of tone, of timing, of character. She was listening more deeply to dialogue, refining her sense of pacing. Each playful sketch was practice for the finely tuned balance of her later novels, where humor, insight, and restraint worked together like instruments in quiet harmony. What's most remarkable, perhaps, is that this literary voice arose from the mingling of voices in a shared space, from the contrast between observation and participation. Jane was both inside her world and apart from it. That tension, held gently, became her greatest strength. As dusk deepened and the family gathered once more, the drawing room transformed into a space of softer light and more reflective energy. A fire was lit. Candles flickered in brass holders. Slippers were exchanged for soft shoes, and chairs were pulled closer to the hearth. And somewhere, in this calm, Jane's imagination sparked again. Her characters often came to her quietly, not fully formed, but as glimpses. A young woman with a steady gaze. A proud gentleman whose silence masked a thoughtful mind. A sister who carried responsibility too heavily. A man whose manners betrayed his true nature. These figures drifted into her thoughts like shadows on the wall, taking shape through quiet, incremental discovery. Perhaps Elizabeth Bennet first walked across Jane's thoughts during an evening like this, her steps measured, her wit sharpening like the point of a pen. Perhaps Eleanor Dashwood first stood beside a fireplace, holding back tears with the poise Jane admired in others and cultivated in herself. These characters emerged slowly, as real people do, shaped by the emotional nuance Jane understood so intimately. Jane's own face in such moments might have appeared still, her expression composed, her hands steady. But behind her calm exterior, entire worlds were turning. She once said that she painted on a little bit of ivory, meaning that her stories, though focused on small-scale domestic lives, were intricate and finely rendered. In truth, the scale was never small. The stage might be a drawing room or a countryside walk, but the stakes were deep and human. During family evenings, Jane sometimes read aloud, not only published works by others, but her own stories, shared with a twinkle of mischief and a knowing glance. Her humor was never cruel, but it was precise. She held up a mirror to her world, not to mock it, but to gently show its inconsistencies, its assumptions, its overlooked absurdities. Her characters conversed with wit, misjudged each other, learned, grew, failed, and endured. And they did so in spaces she knew well, in rooms like the one she sat in each night, with hearths and teacups, glances and long silences. The realism of her fiction came not from imagination alone, but from deep memory and careful listening. She believed in writing what she knew, and what she knew best were the intricacies of daily life, how a mother might press her daughters toward marriage with excessive energy, how a conversation might change the course of a relationship, how a misunderstanding might bloom slowly into revelation. Her table, that small 12-sided space of wood and ink, became the heart of a revolution, quiet, unannounced, but unmistakably lasting. The city of Bath, with its curved crescents of honey-colored stone and gently murmuring mineral springs, seemed at first glance a place designed for lightness, for promenades beneath parasols, for music spilling from assembly rooms, for laughter drifting through colonnades of Roman columns. For many in Georgian England, Bath was the pinnacle of refinement. A city where social introductions were made, fortunes pursued, and appearances carefully polished. And into this polished world came Jane Austen, leaving behind the peaceful fields of Hampshire. When the Austen family relocated to Bath in 1801, it marked the end of one season and the quiet beginning of another. It would be a time of transition, of emotional retreat, and of lessons not easily named. For Jane, Bath offered a strange kind of dissonance, a setting rich in social activity, but faint in the deeper rhythms that had nourished her writing before. The ballrooms were bright, the gowns exquisite, the conversations endless. But beneath the glittering surface, Jane felt a quiet distance, as if her thoughts belonged elsewhere, walking still among the fields of Steventon. At the turn of the 19th century, Bath was in full bloom. Georgian architecture framed every view, arched windows and sweeping terraces glowing golden in the sun. The streets were always moving, women in soft-spoken clusters, their skirts brushing cobblestones, gentlemen pausing to tip their hats beneath parasols, carriage wheels clattering past the iron railings of Sydney Gardens. Jane, in her 20s by the time of their arrival, became a quiet observer of this well-ordered stage. She and her sister Cassandra attended dances and concerts, joined walks along the River Avon, visited bookshops and tea rooms. There was a rhythm to it, a social calendar carefully observed, but for Jane, it felt more like performance than purpose. Letters from this period reflect a tone of irony. She noted the extravagance of fashions, the vanity of certain acquaintances, the way ambition dressed itself in elegance. She smiled often, sometimes genuinely, sometimes archly, But what emerged in her writing during this time was a more nuanced sense of what it meant to belong, or not to belong, to the world she was moving through. Unlike the wild inventiveness of her Steventon stories, her creative work slowed in Bath. She wrote less. The stories that had once poured out of her with laughter and sharpness now seemed to pause, as if her voice were looking for a place to land. Still, she watched. Always, she watched. She saw how appearances could be both armor and trap. How a fortune, or lack thereof, shaped every glance exchanged. How some people became larger than life in society's eyes, while others, quiet, perceptive, kind, faded into the background. These observations would rest gently within her, not yet written, but waiting for a softer, more contemplative novel to come. In 1805, while still living in Bath, Jane suffered a great loss. Her father, Reverend George Austen, passed away unexpectedly. The event, quietly recorded, was deeply felt. He had been a constant, thoughtful, supportive, affectionate. His absence left not only emotional sorrow, but practical uncertainty. The Austen women, Jane, Cassandra, and their mother, now faced financial dependence on the goodwill of Jane's brothers. Without a permanent home, they moved from one rented lodging to another. The gentle predictability of country life was replaced with a kind of impermanence: furnished rooms, borrowed hearths, short leases. Jane's writing ceased almost entirely during this time. Not because her imagination had left her, but because the ground beneath her had shifted. This period is sometimes called a silent phase in her creative life. But silence, in Jane Austen's world, did not mean absence. It meant reflection. It meant attention. And it meant learning how grief softens and redefines the lens through which we see the world. She came to understand longing, the ache of disconnection from home, from rhythm, from one's creative self. She understood, more deeply than ever before, the quiet ache of characters like Anne Elliot, who carry emotion in stillness and learn to wait with grace. Though little was written during these years, much was gathered. The city of Bath, which would later serve as a backdrop in both Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, had left its mark. It taught Jane about the spaces between people, the way loneliness can echo even in a crowd, and the gentle strength it takes to move forward in uncertain times. In the latter of those novels, Anne Elliot walks the very streets Jane once knew. She observes, reflects, remains composed. But inside, she is alive with memory and possibility. Her journey is quiet, as was Jane's. She left Bath in 1806 with her mother and sister, entering a time of even greater transience, dependent on the homes of brothers, staying months at a time in unfamiliar places. But something had shifted. Beneath the seeming stillness of those years, her understanding had deepened. The characters who would soon fill her greatest novels were beginning to gather again, softly, steadily, like voices returning after a long hush. In Jane Austen's novels, there are no sword fights, no queens on thrones, no epic betrayals or sweeping wars. And yet, her stories remain among the most profound examinations of human nature ever written, precisely because of where they choose to look. Her world turns not on kingdoms, but on drawing rooms. Not on declarations, but on conversations. And at the heart of nearly every story stands a woman, thoughtful, quietly bold, and deeply real. These women do not transform through magic or conquest. They do not conquer kingdoms. They live in households, visit neighbors, play piano, walk country lanes, and write letters. But within those everyday actions, Austen revealed an entire emotional landscape, rich with nuance, growth, and quiet power. Her characters endure, not because they are loud, but because they are heard. Consider Elizabeth Bennet, lively, sharp, and full of wit. She laughs. She questions. She walks muddy fields with her petticoats 6 inches deep in mud, entirely unconcerned with appearances. But beneath her vivacity is a careful observer. Elizabeth sees beyond the surface, even if she must first overcome her own pride to do so. Her journey is not one of rebellion, but of understanding, of how impressions can mislead and how hearts must be listened to gently over time. Then there is Eleanor Dashwood, composed and reserved, quietly carrying her family's burdens while hiding her own sorrow. Her voice is rarely raised. Her love, when disappointed, remains private. Yet Eleanor is no passive figure. She is thoughtful, resilient, and deeply ethical. She embodies a kind of strength rarely celebrated, the ability to feel deeply without losing composure, to act with integrity even when it costs her peace. Anne Elliot, the heroine of Persuasion, is perhaps Austen's most interior character, a woman who once made a decision based on duty and who now lives with the gentle ache of regret. Anne is not assertive. She does not demand a second chance. She waits, watches, listens. Her power lies in reflection, in steadiness, in enduring love. And when that love returns, it does so not because she chased it, but because her stillness spoke more powerfully than any plea could. Even Emma Woodhouse, often mistaken as Austen's most frivolous character, offers an arc of genuine growth. Spoiled and clever, Emma believes she knows what is best for everyone around her. And yet, her awakening is not dramatic, it's gradual. She learns to listen, to recognize her own flaws, to understand that even good intentions can hurt when not guided by empathy. Her transformation, like all of Austen's heroines, is inward, quiet, but complete. Each of these women lives in a world that restricts their choices. Marriage, inheritance, and status shape their prospects. But Austen's brilliance lies in how she reveals their agency nonetheless, not by having them escape these limits, but by navigating them with subtlety and strength. Jane Austen gave us a new kind of heroine, one defined by thoughtfulness, growth, and grace. In her hands, womanhood was not one note or ornamental. It was layered, complex, full of contradiction and intelligence and wit. These were women who felt deeply and reasoned carefully. They made mistakes. They misunderstood others. But they also learned and changed and chose. Their battles were often invisible. The decision to remain silent when speaking might cost someone else peace. The courage to speak when silence had become a burden. Through her characters, Austen questioned the values of her society, gently but unmistakably. What was the worth of a woman without a dowry? Why should her future rest on the opinions of distant relatives or the weight of a gentleman's fortune? In giving her characters the power to choose love over status, truth over performance, self-respect over convenience, Austen was writing something far more revolutionary than it first appears. Her novels are filled with scenes of social formality, card games, dinners, drawing room visits. But beneath these scenes lies a quiet resistance. Her heroines often push back with a well-timed remark, a refusal to flatter, a walk taken alone, a letter that reveals the heart more honestly than any public act could. These small rebellions, a dance refused, an engagement broken, a silence finally filled, echo with meaning. Austen understood that real change often begins not with grand gestures, but with the decision to think differently. And then, slowly, to live differently too. She did not give her heroines perfect endings because they conformed. She gave them peace because they remained themselves. And even now, centuries later, these women continue to resonate. Not because they are idealized, but because they are recognizable. Their doubts, hopes, joys, and missteps feel deeply human. They remind us that strength can look like patience, that courage can look like clarity, that sometimes the quietest voices carry the farthest. Austen's world of women was created to inspire reflection, and in their stillness, her heroines continue to move readers toward truth. In 1809, after years of drifting from lodging to lodging, Jane Austen returned, not to Steventon, but to a place that would feel nearly as comforting. Chawton Cottage, a modest house nestled along a quiet Hampshire lane, became her new home. Offered to the Austen women by her brother Edward, who had inherited property nearby, the house was not grand, but it was theirs. And perhaps even more importantly, it was steady. The rooms of the cottage were small and familiar. Low ceilings, soft floorboards, and a garden that bloomed with herbs, lavender, and fruit trees. The road outside saw more birdsong than carriages. Inside, there were quiet hours, simple routines, and, for the first time in many years, the space for Jane to write. It was here that her creativity returned in full. Here, her voice, refined by silence, sorrow, and maturity, found its clearest expression. And it was here, at a small table in a quiet room, that she began the next and most fruitful chapter of her literary life. Jane's days at Chawton followed a gentle rhythm. Morning tea, a walk with Cassandra, then long hours at her writing desk. She used a small walnut table, placed near a window for natural light, and there she shaped, revised, and created with care. In those first years, she took out earlier manuscripts and reworked them with new insight. Eleanor and Marianne became Sense and Sensibility. First Impressions was reshaped into Pride and Prejudice. Then came Mansfield Park and Emma, novels full of delicate irony and subtle transformation. With each, her style grew surer, her sentences more measured, her touch lighter, but no less powerful. Jane wrote with a desire for excellence. Her revisions were exacting. Her characters were polished until they felt discovered. Her humor, so easy to overlook for its gentleness, became sharper, more elegant, and more enduring. Her family supported her efforts. Cassandra, always near, offered quiet companionship. Her brothers handled matters of publication and negotiation. But Jane made the creative decisions. The stories, the voices, the tone, all were hers. And unlike her early years in Bath, where the weight of displacement silenced her imagination, Chawton offered her a return to rootedness. The natural world once again framed her days, blooming gardens, familiar paths, and the hum of bees in summer air. Her writing flourished in this landscape, in the steady flow of craft perfected in peace. Jane Austen's novels were published anonymously. The title page of Sense and Sensibility, released in 1811, carried only the phrase, "by a lady." Her next book, Pride and Prejudice, made no more of her identity than to note it was by the author of Sense and Sensibility. And yet, readers took notice. The novels sold well for their time, not in astonishing numbers, but steadily. Reviews were thoughtful, often admiring. Some praised her insight and control. Others marveled at the wit so delicately embedded in scenes of daily life. Friends and family began to speak of her talent more openly, even if her name remained off the cover. Within the Austen circle, Jane's quiet fame brought gentle joy. Her brother Henry proudly told others of her authorship. Cassandra guarded her privacy, but celebrated her sister's accomplishments in the privacy of their home. Jane herself responded with quiet satisfaction. There was no parade, no vanity, no public readings. Just a calm pride and a continued focus on the next story, the next line, the next truth waiting to be told. Financially, the success offered some independence. She earned enough to contribute to household expenses, to purchase small gifts, to feel, in some way, rewarded for her long devotion to her craft. But the reward that mattered most to Jane was quieter still. Her words, her voice, her truth had found a home in the minds of others. In 1815, Emma was published with a dedication to the Prince Regent at his request. The gesture was formal, but notable. A quiet woman, writing from a cottage in Hampshire, had reached the edges of royal notice. Her fame, though modest, had begun to ripple outward. And yet, in the final years of her life, Jane showed no sign of wanting more from that fame. She continued to live simply, to walk daily, to correspond with friends and nieces, and to work, with her pen steady and her mind quietly humming. She was not celebrated in salons. Her name was not widely known, but her influence had begun to take root. And in the rooms of Chawton Cottage, where peace reigned and her imagination moved freely once more, Jane Austen was exactly who she was meant to be, a writer at work, shaping stories that would outlive even the most celebrated of her time. In July of 1817, Jane Austen passed away at the age of 41 in the city of Winchester, not far from where her life had begun. Her death was gentle and quiet, much like her life, attended by her sister Cassandra, surrounded by the calm hush of final hours. She was laid to rest in the ancient cathedral of Winchester, beneath a plain stone that, at the time, made no mention of her writing. It would be years before the world truly recognized what had been lost. For in the stillness she left behind, something extraordinary began to bloom. Her legacy, like her life, unfolded in the slow, steady turning of pages, one reader at a time, one story rediscovered, one moment of connection that echoed across time. Her fame, once modest and anonymous, began to gather light. Her voice, once bound to a small table in a Hampshire drawing room, began to travel, quietly, insistently, until it reached the farthest corners of the literary world. And it did so in the way Jane herself might have imagined, with care, with reflection, and without haste. For many years after her passing, Jane Austen's name was known only among devoted readers and family friends. Her works remained in print, but were seen as charming, delicate portraits of English country life, well written but minor. It was not until the mid-19th century, long after her final manuscript had been laid aside, that critics began to look again, more closely, more reverently. Writers and scholars alike began to realize what had always been there: the careful structure of her novels, the perfection of her dialogue, the depth of her characters, the astonishing control of her tone. George Henry Lewis, a literary critic and partner of novelist George Eliot, was among the first to praise her openly, calling her the greatest artist that has ever written, and others soon followed. By the end of the 1800s, Jane Austen had moved from byre lady to one of the most celebrated novelists in the English language. Her stories were translated into French, German, Russian, and beyond. The drawing rooms and footpaths she had described with such intimate care became recognizable settings across the world. And her heroines, Elizabeth, Eleanor, Emma, Anne, took their places beside the great literary figures of any age, their quiet strength speaking louder than centuries of louder voices. Universities taught her work. Scholars unpacked her irony, her satire, her layered meanings. And yet, even in the highest halls of academia, her stories remained what they had always been: deeply human, endlessly relatable, and full of soft, illuminating truth. Today, Jane Austen's influence is everywhere, yet still as gentle as the pen she used to write with. Her books are continuously in print, translated into over 40 languages, adapted into films, television, stage plays, and even reimagined novels. But more than that, her way of seeing the world, careful, compassionate, piercing, has shaped the way readers think, not only about fiction, but about life. Her works are taught to students discovering literature for the first time, cherished by readers who return to her sentences for comfort, for clarity, for perspective. Her characters are not frozen in history, they live. They walk with us. Their emotions still echo our own. Her voice, too, has become a kind of companion. It does not tell us what to think. It shows us, softly, what lies beneath the surface of human interaction. Her restraint reveals depth. Her irony reveals kindness. Her observation reveals a truth that few writers ever reach, that the quietest moments are often the most meaningful. Museums now preserve her homes. Pilgrims walk the streets of Bath, the lanes of Chawton, the nave of Winchester Cathedral. And each year, on her birthday, readers gather around the world, some dressed in Regency costume, others simply in the warmth of her words, to celebrate not just her work, but her spirit. In a world that often moves too fast, speaks too loudly, and rewards spectacle, Jane Austen's continued presence reminds us of another way. She shows us the strength in simplicity, the courage in observation, the beauty in precision. Her life was not long. It was not widely documented. And yet, she gave the world more than many who lived twice her years. Her ink was quiet, but it has not faded. It rests now in the lines we reread, in the hearts of those who walk alone under starlit skies, pondering character, in the minds of those who find themselves smiling at a sentence that knows them better than they expected. Her legacy is not just in libraries. It is in us. And in that quiet, steady way, Jane Austen remains. The candle burns low now, its golden light flickering softly against a page half filled with careful ink. The pen has been set aside. The room is still. Outside the cottage window, the breeze stirs the branches of an old apple tree, its blossoms catching the moonlight. Somewhere in the dark, a barn owl calls, its voice long and low, as if echoing the final paragraph of a book just closed. This is the world Jane Austen knew. A world of tea poured slowly, of long walks under changing skies, of conversation shaped not for noise, but for understanding. Her legacy, like the sound of that owl, continues to float through the quiet. As we settle now, thoughts drifting like the mist that once rolled over the Hampshire fields, we might remember Jane not only as a novelist, but as a companion, someone who observed the world gently and offered it back to us with more meaning than we'd seen at first glance. She lived most of her days in modest rooms, walked the same country lanes again and again, and sat for hours at a tiny table where she gave her attention to people, their flaws, their goodness, their hopes. She showed us that a single drawing room can hold an entire world if we are willing to notice. And so, as you rest now, your body growing heavier, your breathing slowing with each soft beat of the night, you are in the company of a quiet voice, one that has moved gently through time and found its way here, beside you. No need to remember every detail. Let them fade like morning fog. Let only the feeling remain of peace, of thoughtfulness, of story. The lanes of Hampshire are still there, somewhere beneath the stars. The wildflowers still bloom in silence, and a small 12-sided table still waits in memory, its surface worn with the shape of every story ever born in calm. You've walked far tonight, through orchard paths, through drawing rooms lit with firelight, through the pages of 6 novels and the heart of a quiet legacy. Let it all drift into the background now, soft as twilight. Let the hush settle over you. You're safe. You're warm. You are, as Jane might say, in want of nothing more than rest. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. I hope it brought you a little peace, a little wonder, and a little closer to rest. Until next time, sweet dreams.